Yes.
College students and normal people.
Two groups. Very good. Anyone else want to have a go at that? So the truth is that, like Jews, yeah, let's not forget the Jews.
Some Jews, anti-Semites, and the rest of the world.
Right. So I think what's interesting here is that we're getting varying ideas here, but what's very important is that before we step out of Sinai Temple and into that world, we have to understand, at least within our own thinking, who are these people that potentially we'll be talking with, or to, preferably with, if we can manage a conversation, and then understanding how we present ourselves and how we present Israel. So the three ways that I break it down, and again, I'm not always right. My wife says so. And that is three groups as follows. Those who love Israel, those who are convinced that Israel is right most of the time, or always right, or has a right to defend itself, and so on and so forth. That's one group. Then you have the group who says Israel has no right to exist. From the river to the sea, although they may not quite remember which river or sea, but there is a river or sea, and that should all be Palestine. Okay? People who are out there today saying very anti-Semitic things, a lot of incitement to violence and hatred and so on, against Israel, against Jews perhaps. And those are the two significant groups, here and here. Now there's a third group. And the third group is those who don't know, don't really care, don't understand. And together with them, there's a group of, I know a little bit, I'd perhaps like to know more, I'm kind of interested. And I want to suggest to you that we all try to focus on that group, okay? Because those who say, I love Israel, I eat falafel for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, everything's good, we don't need to work with them. It's good to work with them, but they're not our challenge right now. It's good to strengthen them. And those who hate us or hate Israel, I'd love to have a show of hands of those who believe that we'll be able to change their minds. If anyone's that confident, I'm not that confident. Okay? So I'm suggesting that we spend the time focusing on that middle group of people who are people we work with. Maybe the Uber driver that is a friendly chap. Okay? The people who don't know and don't understand but would be open to hearing more. When we focus on those who hate us and we allow them to get us very angry and very upset and very defensive, we're probably not doing the best thing that we can for Israel. That's not our target population. Okay? Does anyone see what I'm saying here or completely disagree? We have limited numbers of Jews in the world. We're outnumbered on social media. We're desperately outnumbered in real numbers. And we have limited energies. I'm suggesting we use our energy for just that group. Those who perhaps want to hear and want to learn. Now about the energy piece. In 2002, I spoke at Witwatersrand University in South Africa. Now, South Africa today, as we've learned in the last few months, is not the prettiest place for being pro-Israel blue and white flag wavers. Back then, it wasn't so much fun either, I have to say. It was just after the Durban Conference on racism, which became the Durban Conference on how to hate Israel. And I stood in front of this group, which was predominantly Muslim, okay? And they placed undercover Jewish community security group people in the audience in case someone tried to have a go at me. And afterwards, I gave a whole speech on Israel, the Palestinians, the conflict, the difficulties. And afterwards, a Muslim woman came up to me afterwards, and she began a bit of an aggressive tirade against me, verbally shouting at me that but the Palestinians are suffering, and there's been suffering under occupation, and they have poverty, and so many of them are dying, and the children have no hope, and they're living terribly, and their houses are so poor, and it's a terrible situation, and what do you expect us to do, and so on and so on and so forth. Very emotional, kind of in my face. My answer to her was, I get it. I see where you're coming from. The whole thing is an absolute tragedy. It's a human tragedy, what's going on between Israel and the Palestinians. And you know what her initial reaction was before our conversation? Her first reaction to my response to her was, oh. And this is a true story. Why was her reaction, oh? Because she expected me, the Israel advocate, to say, no, you're wrong, it's all because of the terrorism, and it's not your land, it's our land, and we were there first, and the Torah says this, and we have a right to be there more than you, and you fired first, and we fired second. And at the end of the day, we're all human beings, and there is a way to be an advocate for Israel without losing our humanity. And that's a really important message that I want to give you. You can then go on to the whole discussion about, well, who's to blame for that? And I did. But I was able now to discuss with her, level-headed, without too much emotion. And that's my second tip for you. Use emotion. Talk about the fact that babies and teenagers and women and men and elderly are held as hostages today in Gaza with no rights and no access to any help at all or aid. In fact, Hamas, as you may have heard today, claims they don't even know who's alive and who's no longer alive among them. We can use emotion. We can talk about those who were slaughtered at the nature party at Nova down in the south. We can talk about the suffering of Jews. We can talk about, I won't tonight, about my own son who was in Sderot on that Shabbat, on Simchat Torah, and we spent our Shabbat morning on the telephone, which we don't normally do, looking for our son. There's plenty of, he's okay. There's plenty of emotion we can use. My second tip to you is use emotion, but don't get emotional. They love it when the Jews start to scream, but there's blood all over running through the streets of Jerusalem. And how could you? You know, there was a video the other day from Texas where pro-Hamas or pro-Palestinian protesters burst into a retirement home and a synagogue in Texas. Did you see that? You can look for it on YouTube. They burst in and they started literally screaming at elderly people in this Texas Jewish retirement home. And you heard the rabbi from the stage saying, because you had some quite elderly people starting to hit and attack the protesters. And he said to his congregation, don't touch them. Don't hit them. That's what they want. They're filming us. They want to see the violent, emotional, out of control Jews attacking these people just expressing their freedom of speech. So what I'm saying is emotion, yes. Getting emotional and, as we say, losing it is not a good way to go. That's what they want. They want you to scream. They want you to yell. I'm saying tell the stories of the hostages. Tell the stories of the missile strikes. Tell the stories of children, grandchildren, friends you have in Israel who are sharing their experiences. Keep control of yourself because you lose that. You lose the narrative. And the third thing I want to say to you, and I'm actually going to leave an article with you because I think it's interesting, is read and learn and out-fact them. Most of these people don't like facts. They don't know the facts. And if you're able to have a conversation with people, using facts is very powerful. Use emotion. Don't get emotional. No screaming. Let them scream. And learn the facts. Understand what river are we talking about and what sea are we talking about, and you're going to mention that shortly. And understand things like, what does the international law actually say? So when someone says to you, but Israel is in breach of the Geneva Convention, first of all, you should ask, which Geneva Convention is that? Which UN resolution is that? and then take a moment to learn ourselves. And the article I'm going to leave you with, and with this I'll end, is actually an article which explains, it's very brief, 3 columns. And what does it ask? It asks the question, is it legal or illegal for Israel to strike with military force a residential building or a home or a mosque or a hospital? By the way, none of us want to see Israel ideally striking hospitals, mosques, and homes. But as you know, it's been happening in a considerable amount this time, and it's happened in recent conflicts in Gaza and in Lebanon. The question is that illegal by international law? Because everyone you speak to who is pro-Palestinian or concerned for human rights, of which we all are, will tell you it is 100% illegal, and what Israel is doing is illegal. So you will see in this article that I'll leave with you that, in fact, according to the first additional protocol to the Geneva Convention of 1977, it is legal to strike a residential building or a public facility like a mosque, unfortunately, or a hospital, unfortunately, if it is being used for military purposes. Okay? And I want you, these are the kinds of things that we as Friends of Israel need to learn and understand. And in this article, you can do it in 5 minutes of reading. It does not mean, and the Geneva Convention relates to this and international law, that you can do something that is completely disproportionate. Israel cannot carpet bomb Gaza because a rocket was fired from one house. We just carpet bomb and destroy the entire neighborhood. And we want to believe that Israel's doing everything it can to avoid that. We're not perfect either. But I'm going to leave that with you, and I hope that between knowing your audience and choosing your target population and using emotion but not getting emotional and learning and understanding a little bit about what international law and the facts actually are, we'll all be able to do a great job. And I have to say that the world can't do it without you. Israel can't do it without people like you who take your evening to learn and who go out there and do the best that we can to represent Israel. So thank you very much. You have a question?
Yeah, hi. I'm not sure if you're taking questions or not.
No, we'll save it till the end.
Okay. Oh, I thought that you were done. Sorry.
Yeah, you mean the end?
Yeah, I mean, after Jimmy has...
Okay, I'm done, and I appreciate you listening, and thank you very, very much.
Hi, for those of you who don't know me, I'm Jimmy Taus. I've been working at Israel Advocacy, frankly. My target audience is leaving. I've been working in Israeli advocacy since literally I was in high school during the first Intifada. And that's when it kind of started and when you started seeing some of these things. So I'm going to dovetail on what was already said. I actually don't disagree with you. I would add and modify slightly some of the things for here in America. There's a fourth group, and that's the well-intentioned but very misinformed. And that is most of what you're finding actually on college campuses, for example, and in high schools, and even in, I deal with a lot of young professionals, and that's something that they're facing too. So what I'm going to talk about and dovetailing off of that is, first of all, when to talk and advocate about Israel, how to talk and advocate, literally about advocacy, not even about Israel necessarily, but general advocacy principles. And then 3, I'm going to give you what I call my Rabbi Hillel answers to some of the propaganda that you're hearing out there. And the Rabbi Hillel, one of the reasons I use that is the famous story of Rabbi Hillel. He was asked to describe the Torah and what Judaism is and the time you can stand on one foot. And he famously said, V'ahavta l'recha kamocha, love your neighbor as you would love thyself. And then there's the second half of the phrase that everybody forgets, which he says, now go study. So I'm going to give you some of the answers, the 1-foot answers you can give in a quick argument, but I'm going to encourage you not to stop with that, but like was said, education and teaching yourself, informing yourself is everything. That is the main power that you have against the disinformation is information. So I'm going to start with when, okay? And unfortunately, the college kids left because this is geared to them a lot. Understand the environment you're in and who you're talking to, okay? If you want to discuss it on the college campus, in the middle of your class may, or more likely may not be, the right time to take on the professor. Why? Because there's a fundamental disparity in your position of authority and ability to speak. He's going to be at the head of the class, and he has the right to tell you to sit down and shut up. Not something you can do to the professor. You're setting yourself up for an argument you can't win. Now, that doesn't mean that you shouldn't defend yourself. That doesn't mean you don't have a right to. But understand that when you do it is as important as how you do it and who you're talking to. Because those environments can mean all the difference in the world. If you come by a rally of 500 Palestinians waving flags, or 500 college students who don't know any better waving Palestinians' flag, chanting from the river to the sea, guess what? Probably not the best time to have the conversation. It's going to be a shouting match. You're not actually going to get a chance to actually do the advocacy. You're going to be most of the time just defending and screaming and back and forth, and that doesn't accomplish anything. Keep in mind that when you're doing Israel advocacy, the point is not just to sit there and say the stuff, but to actually have an impact. And it's the other slight distinction I'm going to make with you. The two groups, there's two groups in there that we need to focus on. And the other group is, unfortunately, the Jewish kids who are very pro-Israel because they've been told to be, but don't actually know why. Right, and that came up, Mike Halpern, and I'm forgetting the other actor's name right now, who said, Jewish actor who said, I went to Jewish camp and I went to Jewish school, and they told me to love Israel, but they lied to me. They told me that, they didn't tell me that there were already people there and the Palestinians were there first, right? So that Jewish group, unfortunately, particularly here in America, has lost their way because they're facing so much of this in school with their teachers. Even in high school, California's trying to change its public curriculum to make it mandatory in teaching that Israel's an apartheid state as part of California curriculum in public schools. Understand that that Jewish group is a very important one also, that we do need to bring our kids here, whether they be elementary, high school, or college age. That's not a group that we can ignore. And yes, for the most part, I agree with you when we're talking, it's about that group of people who aren't already deeply entrenched in their position, the ones who are persuadable, right? Because just arguing with somebody who's never going to agree, listen, if you sit down with a member of Hamas, the odds of him turning into the Green Prince are very small, okay? He's not going to change his mind. He's not going to all of a sudden become an advocate for Israel, okay? So understand the when. And I also want to say this to college kids. This is going to be controversial for some of you, but understand that there are consequences to your advocacy. I wouldn't be doing you justice if I sent you out there and just told you, go ahead and argue with them, go ahead and advocate, without being fair and telling you there are consequences. And I'm not telling you not to do it. I personally think that the consequences are worth it. I tell that to my own daughter. However, I want to be fair to people going out there. And it's not fair to send them out there without them knowing. A lot of kids on campus right now are talking about, I won't mention names, but I know somebody whose parents, they were advocating at Columbia, and their parents literally had to go out and hire private security for them. So it's not fair to send them out without telling them and then arming them, which is the other two parts we're going to talk about. So the how. How to talk to somebody is dependent always upon the environment you're in and which one which one of the groups that you're referencing. But understand that the person you're talking to is not necessarily the person you're speaking for. When you're debating somebody, even if it's an entrenched person whose mind you're never going to convince, there's other people listening. Those are the people that you're trying to sway. The people who actually aren't talking, but are just sitting there listening, because they haven't made up their minds yet. They haven't taken a strong position yet. So how you do it is dependent upon your environment. And always keep in mind, who is your target audience? Who is it you're speaking to? Because it'll vary. If you're speaking with somebody entrenched, Sometimes you do want to show a little bit more emotion. Don't lose your temper. Don't lose your cool. Don't let it degrade into a shouting match or start using foul language that doesn't actually support you. As a matter of fact, most people are seeing now that, he mentioned the one that happened in Texas. There was in New York. They went to a children's cancer hospital. And they were out front screaming, saying, let them hear you inside, because the major donors to that cancer center were Jewish and it bore a Jewish name. So they decided to go protest in front of a children's cancer hospital. How much support do you think they gained doing that? You think they swayed anybody by going to a children's cancer center and screaming at these patients and their families? How you advocate matters, where you advocate matters, and when you advocate matter. Now, I have a couple tactics, and by the way, these work for me. I think they will work for most people, but you have to develop your own style, and you'll do that more and more as you get more and more informed, which is, again, one of the most important things that you can do. But how to advocate? Ask questions. Be empathetic. Why? Because you're trying to disarm the person you're talking to. Somebody who's very angry, like the story that he was saying, right? He showed empathy. What happened? All of a sudden, she's taken aback. Now you can start a dialogue, and more importantly, the undecideds who are listening. See one person showing empathy, one person showing reason, and the other person just yelling like a madman. Which one do you think is more persuasive? Which one would persuade you? So I find that the best way to do that is, one, be empathetic, and two, ask questions instead of tell people, right? I can tell you that Jordan is already a Palestinian state. I can tell you that under the British mandate, it included both what they call now Transjordan, or the Kingdom of Jordan, and Israel. But if I come to you instead and say, hey, I hear you chanting from the river to the sea. I don't think you're anti-Semitic. I don't think you're calling for genocide. But I don't understand why that chant. Why are you stopping at the river? What? That's invariably the question you get, or the response you get when you say, why are you stopping at the river? What do you mean, why am I stopping at the river? If you're advocating for Palestine and you want it to go the way it was without colonialism, right, you have to go back to the British mandate. Why are you giving away 2/3 of Palestine? Don't you care about the Palestinian people? Don't you want them to have a homeland? Don't you want them to have all of it? That's why you're saying from the river to the sea. What about the rest of it? Now, it disarms them. And now they're left questioning, right? Because part of the advocacy in this context is even the person you're talking to, you're not going to necessarily change their mind on the spot. That rarely occurs because people's ego won't let them say, you know what, you were right, I've been wrong this whole time. What was I thinking? It just doesn't happen. Your ego won't allow it. But if you can make them start questioning things, if you can make them start researching things, right? I do these talks all the time. I don't like using a slideshow or a PowerPoint. Why? Because you're not going to have a slideshow or a PowerPoint when you're talking to these people. So what I do is what I'm going to do right now. And this is going to transition into the one-legged responses of what to say, and I'm going to show you how to use the questions with it. So take out your phones. Yes, I'm a speaker saying, please take out your phones. I mean it. Take out your phones. So ask somebody a simple question. Can you pull up a flag? Type in, say, 1914 or 1924, Palestinian flag. Do it. Who's got it? Anyone? Bring it up. There it is. That's a good big picture of it. May I? Yeah. Can you guys see this? I don't know if the cameras can. I don't know which camera even I'm supposed to look at. Do you see it? It's actually a blue and white flag with the yellow Star of David. Now, I don't need to tell him that is this the one from 1914, I believe it is? 24. This is the 1924. I don't need to tell him that in 1924, when people were talking about Palestinians, they were talking about Jews. I can have him look it up. Which one do you think is more persuasive? Me telling him that in 1924 Palestinians meant Jews, or me having him look it up on his own phone and discover the own answer for himself? That's advocacy. That's the one-legged answer. Obviously, the question gets more in depth as you go, and the more information you have, the more you're able to ask these questions. Going to the one-legged answers, the genocide that we keep hearing about. Pull out your phones. Ask Siri or whoever it is you've got, what was the population of Jews in Europe in 1920? Somebody? Anyone? Look it up. Close. Depending on the numbers, it's somewhere between 9 and 13 is what you usually find. Okay? Now, ask the person you're talking to. Now tell me what the population of Jews in Europe is in 1945. You'll find that it's about 3 million. 2/3 of the population was exterminated. That's a genocide. Now look at your phones. Do it again. Look up the population of Gaza, let's say, in 2002. You're going to find about 1 million. Now look it up today. What's the population? Over 2 million. But I want you to look it up on your phones, right? Telling people these answers. They may or may not believe you, and they're just going to go on to the next discussion. Making them be part of your own argument. Having them do it for you. That's how you persuade people, especially the people listening who are going to pull up their phone because they don't know the answer. So then you say, so the population in Gaza has doubled. You want to compare these two events of a population being exterminated down to 1/3 of its previous size versus a population doubling in size. That's your definition of a genocide. Ask the question. You can even end it on a question, right? Don't say, see, it's not a genocide. Ask the question, is that your definition of a genocide? How are you defining genocide? You're tossing these words around. What does that mean? Right? These are the one-legged answers. They get more complicated, and again, now go study. My other one that I like to point to is apartheid. This is one that gets thrown around a lot. This one's an easy one because there's so many different answers. The hard part is figuring out which answer you want to have them go look up. Right? So you can start with the one that I like to look up. Pull out your phones. I mean it. Pull out your phone. Somebody do it. Ask your phone, Siri, research, how many Arab members of the Israeli Supreme Court are there? How many Arab members, Arab and Muslim members of the Israeli Supreme Court are there?
How many people are in the Supreme Court?
I believe it's 22 in the Israeli Supreme Court. Currently, the answer is 2. I don't know if anybody's found it yet, but so we can keep this moving, I'll say currently the answer is 2. How many black Africans were on South Africa's Supreme Court during apartheid?
0.
Here's a fun one. How many Jewish members of the Supreme Court are there throughout the entire Arab world? Have them look it up. Don't tell them. Have them look it up. Ask the question. Make them be part of their own argument against them. Have them look it up. You can go to the next one. How many Arab and Muslim or Palestinian members are there of Israeli Knesset? No, I don't agree. By the way, let me just, one second. I'm going to take a diversion. I don't want to single anybody out. But for those who couldn't hear it, somebody said too many. Now, this is being recorded and it's being filmed. So the cameras are right there. I assume the people know. No, I don't want anybody to be embarrassed because it's a common thing that's what he was saying about an emotional response, right? But if they hear that you've lost your argument. You've lost the third parties listening that you're trying to persuade, right? Be careful with what you are advocating and how you advocate, right? Because we were on a point. Now the argument, instead of being able to talk about apartheid and whether or not it is whether or not all Israelis think like you and just want to kill all the Arabs and don't want any of them there, right? We've lost. You lost that argument, okay? So, going back to where we were.
There's a million in the Knesset.
There's more than a million of them in the Knesset.
No, just a million.
A million 10? Under the last government, it was greater, right? How many Jewish members of parliament, for those countries that have parliament in the Arab world, how many Jewish members of parliament are there in the Arab world? Which is apartheid. Why is it you're so stuck here? When we say that these arguments that you make aren't just anti-Israel, but anti-Semitic, this is why. Because the only countries that you're looking at, the only time you're looking at it, is when it's a Jewish country and the one Jewish homeland. Right? Here's another one. When it comes to the question of apartheid, okay? Look up what triggered the start of the second Intifada. Does anybody here know? What was it? No. That was later. Nope. Arik with the Al-Aqsa Mosque. Ariel Sharon, the Prime Minister of the State of Israel, visited not inside the Mosque of the Dome of the Rock, but the platform up there, what we call Har Habayit. The Prime Minister of the country visited an area, and that triggered an Intifada. So the Prime Minister of a country isn't allowed to go to parts of the country. You can't talk about parts of the country that the Arabs can't go to. There's no such thing. So if there's any apartheid going on in Israel, it's that the Arabs aren't allowing Jews to go places. They started an Intifada because of it, because of the Prime Minister. You're not even talking about a regular citizen. Can you imagine anywhere in the United States that they would say, I'm sorry, the president isn't allowed here, we're going to start riots because the president visited? Not well. And is that persuasive to most people, though? It doesn't work. Okay?
President was Trump.
Well, maybe. Unfortunately, that is true, and it's changing because it's a fight kind of against the West. But that's a whole other discussion. I'm not going to divert there. But I'm just trying to say. So there's short, quick answers. You can get into the longer answers, and there's discussions that need to be had about what peace looks like, what peace means, how Israel became the size that it is. Going back to the Peel Commission, if those of you who don't know what it is, look it up. Going back to the numerous and multiple peace deals on the table that Israel has offered. There's another fun one that you can, when you're talking to somebody, have them look up. What is the last offer for a peace treaty that Hamas made? For a permanent, not ceasefire right now, but for a peace treaty, for a two-state solution.
They never made that.
Not probably. Here, but Hamas is easy. What's the last peace offer that was actually made by the Palestinian Authority? They signed on to Oslo, but Oslo didn't actually have terms. What's the last offer that they made? What has been their negotiation posture? You want to find out why there's not peace in the Middle East? Research that. Research what the various offers have been. Research the Wye River Accords. Did anybody here know what the Wye River Accords were? Okay. Research Bill Clinton's response to what happened.
I gave the Palestinians everything I could, and they didn't accept.
98% of what they call the West Bank, I call Yudav Shomron, 98% of the West Bank, including a capital in Jerusalem, in East Jerusalem. And they rejected it. They would have had, right now, today, a state. 20 years old. More. Right? When was Wye River? 96? No, it was before 2000. Anyhow, over 25 years, they'd have had a state already. Think if all the money that the international community through UNRWA and all these other organizations, the Qataris, the Saudis, when they were doing pay for slay, think about how if all that money had been invested into building a Palestinian state, where we would be today. We wouldn't be talking about hostages. We wouldn't be talking about what percentage of Gaza has been destroyed or not destroyed, how we can get a ceasefire. Have them look up when you're talking to somebody, have them look up that question. What's the last peace treaty? What was the offer? That's how you advocate and get somebody else to make your argument for you. But again, I'm going to end on this. I can't stress enough. These are quick, short one answers. I'm happy to take questions for ones that you guys have heard out there that you need responses for. But I like to, oftentimes with young kids, I start with this, I'm going to end with this on this one. How many people in this room have friends or family in Israel? Okay. Because it's important for this crowd, which is what I was talking about, the Jewish kids and stuff, to understand this. How many of you have that family or friends in Israel that are looking to exterminate the Palestinians? It's not who we are. It's not what we're interested in. We have our extremists, no question. But when we have one who will go into a mosque, as happened, I don't like mentioning his name because I don't want to give him any credibility. When he went in and shot up a mosque, you know how many streets were named after him? None. You know how much candy was passed out for it? None. We're not perfect. And by the way, as part of advocacy, it's okay to admit when we make mistakes. We have. Every country does. Trying to argue that we're perfect is unrealistic. But when we make a mistake, we prosecute our soldiers if they did things wrong. We investigate them. We'll send them to prison. We don't pay them and their family for the rest of their lives. They're actually stripped of their pensions. They can go to jail. It's a fundamental difference in how the two operate. Have them look at that. Name one street in Israel named after somebody who went out and massacred Palestinians. You won't find it. Have them look up stuff. I mean, again, you have to make sure that you ask them the question to talk about, because they throw out terms so easily. They don't know what they mean. And you can't tell them what those terms mean. Because they'll tell you, well, that's not what it means to me. I can tell you, I know that Hamas, when they argue from the river to the sea, they're talking about genocide. They're talking about the same thing that the Mufti of Jerusalem said when he said, we're going to push all the Jews into the sea back in 1948. Or when the Mufti met with Hitler and talked about exterminating the Jews. We know what they mean, but that doesn't help you telling them that. You have to ask them to look it up. What does it mean? What do they have as a solution with Jews there as well? How have they responded within their own countries when it's not even Jews? What's been the Syrian response when there was the uprising? What's been the response to the Houthis, whether you like or agree with the Houthis or not? What's been the response to the Kurds? What's been the response to the Armenians by the Turks? Ask questions. Ask them, why is it that the only one you seem to know anything about is Israel? And that's the only one you're being spoken to about. Ask the questions.
Sorry, no, how about this one? How many Arab countries are Jews disallowed to enter?
Again, that's a fair question. I don't know the answer offhand, but I'm sure if you looked it up,
I don't know either. But
it's a little bit tougher of a question because you get into issues, for example, of countries like Iran, where most of the people from Iran know what was done to the Jews there. However, there's still a significant Jewish population in Iran. It's much smaller, but it's still a significant population. It becomes a much harder, what?
That's not an Arab country.
Well, no, Iran isn't considered a Muslim country, but not Arab, right? Egypt technically is the same, right? But you can ask these questions. They're fair questions to ask. pose a question, but one thing I will say, okay? This is, the attorneys in the room will back me up. This is Law School 101. Never ask a question you don't already know the answer to. So if you're going to ask the question, make sure you know the answer. Before we go into the question and answers, because I think there were some questions here as well, so I think the format was going to switch now to question and answers.
We'll do like 5 minutes, really quick questions and answers, and we'll continue it over dinner.
Anyway you want to do? Do you want to? Sure. Go ahead. Yeah, please.
A few days ago, I was at the Holocaust Museum of LA.
Yeah.
It was for an event. An IDF soldier, reserve soldier, was there giving a talk about his 100 days fighting in Gaza. And he talked about when the soldiers would go to all the houses in Gaza while they were fighting, they found Nazi propaganda in every house. And he was also saying how what's going on in the ground. He said that the IDF soldier that I saw at the Holocaust Museum said that all the soldiers found Nazi propaganda in every house in Gaza, and how the situation in Gaza is very different from the way the rest of the world sees the war in Gaza, and how the soldiers want to win and they want to take on Hezbollah if Hezbollah keeps being a problem, but they have nothing against the people of Lebanon. It's just the terrorists, Hamas and Hezbollah. And then he was saying, it's very different from the way the soldiers experience it from the rest of the world, how they see it from the outside. The question was, how should that? I don't know how that should affect the protesters and the way that people,
Let me try to shift the question slightly, okay? So what do you do when you have a speaker like that and there's the protesters and they're just trying to shout it down? Because that's really more accurately what we're talking about, what happened in Berkeley, what happens, frankly, all over college campuses today and anywhere a pro-Israel speaker goes, okay? So unfortunately, with mass protests, when the police come and shut you down, there's nothing you can do. But if you're talking to somebody, if you're actually able to engage somebody, you ask a question, okay? I know you think that he's just going to say propaganda, but I'm just curious. What are you so afraid of? What are you so afraid of him saying? You already know what the propaganda line is. What are you afraid of him saying? Are you afraid that you might hear something you didn't know? I'm willing to listen to you. Why aren't you willing to listen? You want to ask me a question? I'll answer the question. I'll talk. Why are you so afraid to hear another perspective? So now you've put them on defense, right? Now you've asked them a very simple, disarming question. I didn't say, why are you an anti-Semitic bastard? Sorry, there's an orange Kurdish there. Why are you so anti-Semitic? You're a racist. Because many of them aren't. I mean, it would be easy to say if there were. Frankly speaking, that's why, as somebody who's been doing this literally since I was a teenager, it's much easier to argue and debate with a neo-Nazi than it is with a progressive college student. Because the progressive college student actually means well. Most of them actually mean well, and they think, if I didn't know better, if all I saw was the 30-second clips you see on TV of Gaza and rubble and not knowing anything else behind that, I don't know what my opinion would be. It certainly wouldn't be as strong as it is right now. They're misinformed. Never before has Mark Twain's famous quote, I don't know if you've heard it before, been more appropriate. Mark Twain was talking then about newspapers, but social media and frankly legacy media is just as guilty. Mark Twain once famously said, if you don't read the newspaper, you're uninformed. If you do read the newspaper, you're misinformed. Unfortunately, that's very prevalent today. But ask them the question, what are you so worried about hearing? What are you so worried he might say? Feel free to listen to what he says so you can refute it. I'm willing to do the same with you. There was a question back there?
Yeah.
Wait for the microphone, so. Do you want to, feel free to chime in with any of these.
I just want to ask you a simple question. You
Yeah.
probably heard an answer.
How do you deal with the Deir Yassin, the...
So Deir Yassin is an interesting question. So for those of you who don't know what Deir Yassin was, During the War of Independence in Israel, the Irgun went into a village known as Deir Yassin, and there's contradictory reports as to what happened. Begin talks about it in his book, The Revolt. There's other eyewitnesses from Arab ones, and there's actually some photo archives showing some, frankly, not nice stuff that happened there that the Irgun may have done to the residents. The question, this is one of those detailed ones that you really have to, it's not a short answer. But in trying to give the short answer, the best one I can say is, Deir Yassin is disputed as to what happened. If indeed what happened was as some of the Arab responses say, and by the way, there's other ones, for example, Egyptian radio talked about it saying that it didn't happen, but assuming it did for a minute, it's a tragedy. Period. Israel's made its mistakes. I won't say it hasn't. Israel made mistakes. It was a young country fighting for survival, outnumbered 10-1, with no real military. Most of them were either children who had been coming from the what they call the Aliyat Noir, or from Holocaust survivors. They didn't have much weaponry. The British mandate didn't allow them to. That's why they had to try to smuggle in weapons on, for example, the famous story of the Altalena and things like that. So they made mistakes. Okay, but even with what you're talking about at Deir Yassin, if it happened, okay, comparing it to and trying to use that as justification for taking babies and literally putting them in microwaves is not comparable. I can also point out stuff from every culture throughout civilization who during war did things that violate what today we would call the rules of war. It's why we established them. But they have been established. And we do know better now. And if your best argument to me is the one that my 5-year-old used to give me when she was a kid, saying, well, they did it, why can't I? You have to reevaluate your position. Is that really the position you want to argue? You want to argue that it's justifiable to commit what you believe was a horrific act, so we're going to commit them now too? That's your solution for peace? That's really what you want to argue? Ask the question. Put them back on defense. You want to wait for them? Oh, wait, he's got the mic, and then we'll get the mic over to you. Again, feel free to chime in anytime you want.
I think that we have to remember that because people questioning what's happening doesn't mean that they're anti-Israel.
Right.
And so the question I come across a lot is U.S. money and arms and bombs falling in Gaza and killing innocent.
So, yeah, I'll give you the answer that I would give. I've been asked that before. First of all, let me say, it's a fair question. As an American taxpayer, it is absolutely a fair question, and I appreciate you asking it. But here's the deeper part of that, okay? That American interests don't just lie within the borders of America, okay? We know that already because we have bases in South Korea. We still have Ramstein Air Force Base in Germany. We're negotiating for new bases all the time, trying to get one in the UAE and in Saudi Arabia and all over the place, okay? There are certain interests in this conflict that you should look up when you talk about the fundamental philosophies of the West versus the philosophy that is being indoctrinated into Palestinian children, as we've seen now from the UNRWA education books, as you see from Palestinian TV, where they have their version of Mickey Mouse endorsing a 5-year-old girl's desire to become a jihadi. Okay? There's fundamental questions. By the way, there's also American citizens who are still being held as captives as well. But we have an obligation to our allies as well, and to those who share common ideas about society and about striving for peace. If you believe for one moment that if Israel was wiped off the face of the earth, that there would be peace all of a sudden in the Middle East, research how many conflicts are going on, officially still today. These are the countries, just some of the ones, still at war with each other. Syria, civil war. Syria and Lebanon, Lebanon civil war, Egypt and Chad, Egypt and Sudan, Iran and Iraq, Saudi Arabia and Yemen, Yemen internally with the Houthis. I can go on, right? We can go back. All of a sudden, when the war broke out, everybody forgot about that poor woman in Iran, Misha, who was killed because some of her hair was showing. Why is it worth spending American money and American artillery to protect our one democratic ally with Western ideals in the region? Because if we don't, we've given up any type of foothold in the area. We've given up any idea. Now, this dates back to the Cold War, but as we see from Putin trying to start it up again, what we used to call the strategic arc of having bases throughout the world so that if we need to respond, we have a place in which to do it. There are real American interests involved. Mention the fact that almost every CIA chief, as well as Pentagon chief, has said that if we didn't give Israel the money that we give them in aid and for self-defense, we would be spending twice that to gain the information and the intel that we're already getting. So it's also a good investment.
My question has to do with
the number of Palestinians, I mean, the people who are being killed in Gaza. How do we respond to being yelled and screamed or accused? And as well as the occupation, so actually I'm asking two different questions.
Okay, I'll answer the first one first. The second one, I'm going to give you the Hillel one-legged answer to, because you mentioned occupation. It was one of the terms I didn't get into, but I will now. Sorry. Well, that picked up all of a sudden. Okay, so the first question as far as the amount of Palestinians dying. It's a tragedy, full stop. Okay? I'm never going to say, well, they deserved it, they should have overthrown Hamas their own. It's a tragedy, full stop. Okay? But just because there's a tragedy occurring to one side versus the other, that doesn't mean that the tragedy is being caused by Israel. Also, by the way, and this is one I have used. So your problem is the disparity with the number of Palestinians versus the number of Israelis being killed, right? You're not disputing whether or not Israel needs to kill this many Palestinians to get rid of Hamas. So what you're really saying is you'd be okay with it if there were more Jews dying. That's a good response, in my opinion. Okay, you put them on the defensive again. So tell me something. How many Jews would it take to die for it to be worth it to get rid of Hamas? How many Israelis have to be massacred? Ask him the question. How many Israelis have to be massacred in order for this war to make sense to you? I think you had a question? Oh.
Is it logical to distinguish between, when you talk about apartheid, about Israel proper and the so-called occupied territories?
I didn't get into the second half of the question. So let's get into this is a longer question. I'll try to do the 1 foot one. Take out your phone. I'm not going to answer it. I'm going to have you answer your own question for you. Okay, so the occupation started officially, at least of what they call the West Bank. Yeah. At least officially, the occupation started in 1967, right? Officially of what they call the West Bank, I call Yudav Shomron. Okay, so officially it started in 1967. So we occupied it in 1967. So look it up. In 1966, who was in control of what they call the West Bank? Okay, well, we must be talking about Gaza then. Look it up. In 1965, who was in control of Gaza? Wait a second. I thought there was an occupation. Who'd we occupy it from? You want to go before then? Do you want to go to the Turks? You want to go to the Brits or the Turks, the Ottomans, the Mamelukes, the Persians? How far back do you want to go? Here's a question for you. Name me the last king, prime minister, president, whatever you want to call it, leader of Palestine. What's his name? No, there wasn't. Let them research that and come back and tell you.
And the fact that it was occupied by another country doesn't
So here's
it's not occupied by Israel.
occupation, first of all, has a definition. Okay? You're occupying it from someone. So the easy answer to that one is also, after 1978, when there was the Camp David Accords, we reached a peace treaty with Egypt. Egypt had been in control of Gaza. Egypt seceded control of Gaza. We gave back the Sinai. No occupation. Egypt gave up rights to it. We signed a peace treaty with Jordan as well. Jordan gave up all claims and rights to Judea Samaria. We occupied it from them. End of story. They don't want it anymore. That's a simple answer. It's not going to be one that satisfies most. So let me get into a little bit more of a deeper answer. It's a longer one. Forgive me. I don't know.
So I think we should continue the questions.
Let me just answer this one here because it's an important one with occupation. And I'm happy to stay here. If you guys want to go there and eat, go for it. I'm happy to stay here and answer questions. I don't know. But the question about occupation with Jordan, it goes back to what I asked you earlier, okay? And colonialism. Why are you stopping at the river? What happened to Transjordan? Who here knows, look it up if you don't, who here knows the official name of Jordan? What the official name of the state is called?
There was no name.
There is. There is. There's an official name as recognized at the UN. What is the official name of Jordan? There we go, the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan. Now that should ask the next question. Who are the Hashemites? Well, not Saudi Arabia, but Arabia. Because the Hashemites were deposed by the House of Saud, which created Saudi Arabia. Okay? But then you have Arabia, right? And what happened is during what was called the Arab uprising, right? Who knows who they were uprising against when you talk about the Arab uprising? The Ottomans, the Turks. So in order for the British to gain the favor of and gain allegiance with the Hashemites in Arabia, they promised their sons two states. One became Iraq, and one became Jordan, the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan. So now you have a country from Arabia established by the British, given to the Arabians in Jordan. That is the definition of a colonial state. That is the definition of an occupied state. By the way, Jordan is, depending on which numbers you use, between 70 to 80% Palestinian. Talk to me again about occupation and colonialism. Why is it you only seem to care when it's Israel? By the way, here's a fun question to ask. Can you tell me the etymology, what the origins of the name Jew, where does it come from? Judea. And actually comes, ironically, from later on, from the Arabic, that they called Yehud. We are called Jews because of that. Here's a fun one. Who has a phone handy? This is a fun one. Now, this one only works primarily with Palestinians and Arabs. You ask them, why is it that you don't think that the Palestinians and the Arabs are smart? Why are you treating them like they're stupid? Why don't you believe them? Pull out your phone. I want you to go to either Islam.com or Quran.com. Use a website that isn't a Jewish one. And look up Quran, chapter 5, 21 through 27. It's the Quran's telling of the 12 spies that went into Canaan, to Canaan, right? They tell it slightly differently than the Torah does. This is in the Quran, where it says, Allah has promised to the followers of Moses the land of Canaan. That's in the Quran. Not the Torah, not the New Testament. That's the Quran. They tell the story a little bit differently. The spies came back saying that there were giants and we can't defeat them. And that's why the Jews had to wander in the desert for 40 years as a punishment for not believing that Allah had actually given to the descendants of Moses this land. And their punishment was 40 years in the desert. That's the Quran.
What ayah is surah again?
I'm sorry?
What surah and ayah?
521 through 27. Why don't you believe them? Why don't you follow their own teachings? Tell me something. Why also, when I say, why do you think the Palestinians are stupid? Do you think you asked this to Palestinian Advocate. Do you think the Palestinian leadership and the Palestinians are stupid? What are they going to say? Yes? Okay, walk away. Right? If they say no, which more accurately, then you ask them. So they had an idea. This wasn't just a bunch of wild animals on October 7th, right? They knew what they were doing. So what was their end game? Play it out. What did they think their goal was? They thought that they were just going to go into Israel, kill a bunch of Israelis, and Israel would say, oh, that's a shame. They knew Israel was going to retaliate. And after Israel retaliated, they would have no way to respond, which means that Israel's retaliation was their end game and their goal.
But they're having it now because of having two states and having a Palestinian state, and they're going to say that that de-escalated.
That de-escalated it?
No, but escalating the discussion of having a two-state solution, and if they wouldn't have gone in, it would not have been.
That actually has not escalated the discussion for a two-state solution, and as a matter of fact, it's pulled support for a two-state solution from the one country that had the most effect and ability to actually negotiate and create a two-state solution, Saudi Arabia. And in fact, Hamas has said that the reason that they went in and started this is because they were trying to derail the peace talks with Saudi Arabia.
Except the world is putting pressure on Israel to escalate.
But it's not a question of the world putting pressure, right? Every political leader has said, whether they were left-wing or right-wing in America and throughout the world, the peace has to be negotiated and agreed to by the parties. The international community, if your whole argument is that colonialism and the West deciding to carve up the Middle East is what caused the problem, you're trying to tell me that your solution is for the West and the other countries to carve up Israel? You're going to have them do it?
But I'm saying that's going to be Hamas's.
Yes, but their whole argument is that colonialism in the West caused the problem in the first place. So why is it now you're looking for the colonialists in the West to solve the problem by doing exactly what they did to cause it in the first place? You want to try to repeat Pakistan and India? Is that going to work? Ask them the question. How do you think that works out? Play it out for me. Tell me the next step. Put them on defense. Make them answer a question that they actually don't know. But not one that's going to make them look, I'm not trying to ever make them look foolish. I could. But that's not going to persuade them. I'm trying to leave them with questions so that when they leave this discussion, they start questioning why they did it. And more importantly, as Michael pointed out, the third parties listening who aren't involved, what they're going to think. That group of people who are the undecideds. And maybe, just maybe, we get lucky and one of these kids who's been misinformed and has been given a whole spew of propaganda in their school starts going, wait a second, that doesn't add up. And you can get them to start asking questions. That's the goal, to get people to start asking their own questions away from you. Now, I will say one last thing before we close. First of all, I'll stay and answer any other questions anybody has. But one last thing I'll say before I go. For those of you who have college kids or high school kids who are facing these type of questions, or even young professionals, because I'm seeing a lot of that, okay? Come talk to me. I'm happy to give you my cell phone number. You can give it to those kids. They can call me anytime. If I'm not in court or otherwise seriously engaged in some other meeting that I can't get out of, I will step out and take that call anytime I can, and if not, call them back, okay?